10th September 2024 it is. Good morning and warm welcome to KBC News Check. My name is Bentro Njue. Lensa Odingo is our sign language interpreter for this live program. This day, 10th September, we are marking World Suicide Prevention Day each and every day, and we'll be having that candid conversation on the second hour of this live show. Of course, it's News Check. What we are keeping tabs on is the Endarasha tragedy updates. We have my colleague JJ Kyoria, who is live in Nyeri, and also we have various parliamentary committees that are currently underway. Shira is on that bit, and also we will be getting to check what is happening in Kisumu and also in Mombasa, where we have our team that is checking what exactly is happening. But on this first hour, allow me to introduce my first guest, who is the Deputy Director for Natural Resource Management at the National Land Commission. His name is Ben Opar. My namesake.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Well. A lot to talk about when you talk about natural resources, national natural resources that we have in the country. This is a conversation I want us to open up. And still on this conversation, he will be telling us all about this book. This is an atlas. You do remember atlas when we were back in primary and high school, but they have formulated an atlas that is encompassing each and every natural resource that we have in the country, be it land, be it forest, be it wildlife conservations, be it natural parks. So we will be touching on this, but that is a little bit later. But first things first, let's start with the natural resources that we have in the country. What is the status?
Thank you very much, Bwana Njue. Kenya as a country is indeed blessed with enormous amount of natural resources, which significantly play a major role in the GDP and socioeconomic development agenda for the people of Kenya. Just to bring you up to perspective, is that when Kenyans gave themselves a constitution, the Constitution of Kenya 2010, they made a lot of commitments. And part of that commitment within the preamble, Kenyans say that they will respect the environment, which is part of their heritage. And when you look at natural resources in Kenya, they're part of those environmental resources, and there are many. We have our hills, we have our mountains, we have our wildlife parks, and the wildlife themselves. We have our critical water catchment areas, we have our water towers, we have our rivers, we have our lakes. We also have a considerable amount of minerals. We also have a considerable amount of petroleum and oil resources. But besides that, we have our beautiful landscape that bolsters food security. And therefore, we have enormous amount of agro-based resources. That includes even the soil, the organisms within the soil. We have the grass, we have the vegetation, we have our plant life, we also have even the weather or the climate. We have also our topographical resources. So Kenya is endowed with a multiplicity of resources as a country. The challenge with our resources centers largely on the governance. The governance being, one, the inadequacy in the participation of the people. And part of the reason why we are here is to inform the public, is to educate the public, is to empower the public with information so that they are able to meaningfully participate in the governance of their natural resources. Thank you.
Make them understand why it is so crucial for the Kenyan economy, these national natural resources. Why are they so crucial to the country's economy and development as well?
Thank you very much, Njue. Our natural resources is what I would call the foundational beacons and pillars for the socioeconomic development of the people of Kenya. If you take, for example, water, our life revolves around water. And in terms of biology, today, my body is 80% plus water. That means I need to consume water frequently. But how do I access that water? Where do I get that water? Most of our water comes from either the lakes, the rivers, or the underground aquifers. And that water is needed, one, to sustain ourselves as a people through our body system, but also importantly, the water is required to promote agriculture and bolster food security for the people of Kenya. Remember, Kenya relies on rain-fed agriculture, or agriculture generally, which is practiced largely at the subsistence level. So Kenyans still require that water to do food security. The water is also equally required for energy production. We require energy which is produced also through geothermal processes or geothermal development processes. And so water becomes very important. It is also within the water where we also find food, particularly fisheries and other blue economy resources living within the water. So water itself contributes immensely to the socio-economic development of the people of Kenya. But again, the other part of the resources that is equally important is the fisheries and blue economy resources. Currently, the population of Kenya, a bigger population of Kenya depends on fisheries resources, and I would tell you for fact is that much of the fish that is consumed in the Republic of Kenya is omena. Omena contributes over 53% of what of the kind of fish that Kenyans constitute or consume, so to speak. That means that Kenya is basically an omena economy. Kenya is driven largely by omena in terms of fish. But then we are also promoting the cultivation and consumption of other marine fisheries, so to speak. And that means that apart from being food as natural resources, they are also sold to provide income at the household level. They are also exported. So when we look at that, then you find the pivotal role of natural resources in the space of human development. Similarly, when you look at our wildlife, Ben, wildlife contributes immensely to the socioeconomic growth of this country. And we know for a fact that tourism who come to Kenya, particularly the international ones, do not come to look at how beautiful our landscapes in terms of concrete, but they come to admire our wildlife resources, the elephants, the giraffes, the rhinos, the hippopotamuses, the birds particularly. They come to look at that. And when they come, they spend enormous amount of money in terms of the hotel and accommodation, in terms of transport, in terms of the tourism sector. And we know for a fact that that contributes immensely in terms of job creation and wealth, or green jobs creation, as well as creation of jobs. Aside from that, our forest sector, the forest resources also contribute substantial amount of food within the forests themselves, but also the attendant microclimatic conditions that are created by the forests themselves in terms of stabilizing the ecosystem. But apart from that, also in ensuring that there is continuous rainfall, that is also feeding our agriculture and also feeding our rivers that we also contribute, we also consume. But the forest also plays a vital role because we also use it for production of timber, which we require for the production of paperwork and other materials around that. In the forest sector, a lot of people have been employed. And so there's employment itself. There's also the wood fuel itself. There's also the aspects of biodiversity resources that I'm talking about, plants that are very important in terms of medicinal value, that communities are able to access forests and get very vital medicinal plants which they use to treat themselves without necessarily visiting the formal health institutions. We also have, I've talked about the agro-based resources that we have. Kenya as a country is blessed with a lot of that. We talk about livestock. We talk about bees, a part of that livestock. We talk about crocodiles, and we have meat coming from that. And so that is part of our own internal food system, but at the same time, it is also exported, and therefore part of our livelihood and GDP growth. Our minerals and petroleum resources are quite many, and we are currently exploiting that, not only to get the income, to take people to school and to do other things, but also importantly is that we are able to raise our GDP through proper and sustainable exploitation of our mineral resources. So there are so many, Ben, and they are so important in terms of their contribution and significance to the whole spectrum of human development.
Maybe for the benefit of our viewers, which are some of the most valuable resources, and especially when it comes to minerals, that we have in the country? Because Kenyans know very well that we've just discovered coltan in the country. They also, you've mentioned oil, vast oil resources, but we don't know what exactly happened or where we are.
Yeah. Our minerals and petroleum resources are many, and of course, our Constitution, under Article 62, regard them as public land. And that's why, as a National Land Commission, having been established under the Constitution as a constitutional body with independence and oversight responsibility, we have jurisdiction to ensure that they are properly managed and utilized for the benefit of all Kenyans as public land or public land resources. We have enormous amount of resources, and this particular atlas has already displayed them, where we have gold, where we have iron ores, where we have copper, where we have diamond, which counties are hosting what specific aspects of minerals in the country, and how and what challenges they are facing in terms of governance, and how that is supposed to be aligned so that we benefit properly from the sustainable exploitation of these resources. The country has faced a challenge of technological innovation, or gaps, so to speak. We've had all these minerals, but then lacking the technology to do what I call the detections. Are we able to establish exactly where they are? And that is what we partly did with the Atlas, but I know that the State Department for Mining has already done a robust airborne survey to establish exactly the exact locations of where Kenya's minerals are found, and in terms of their potential and quantities. So that is a very, very important avenue and a good pathway towards propelling Kenya to another level in terms of socioeconomic development. The new discoveries, apart from the coltan, we also have established that within the Lake region or Western Kenya, there's enormous amount of gold. And that will now make the people living in those particular areas get jobs through those particular informal or even formal systems, but equally important is the revenue that the government is likely to obtain or continues to get, either both at the national level and even the county government level. So the government is able to obtain and generate a lot of revenue from the sustainable exploitation of our mineral resources. And what we are also talking about from the mining subsector is the need to fast track good governance, particularly regulations, to properly govern this so that we do not experience what we are currently experiencing in terms of pilferages of revenue because of several loopholes in the entire value chain of mineral production and exploitation. Yes.
And I'm quite sure a lot of Kenyans want to know exactly what happened to the oil. The last time we checked, a company called Talo was leading the exploitation of the oil there. And for the few maybe years or months the drilling was there, because I don't think it's there anymore as we speak, how did the local communities benefit? I'm asking this because I come from a county where we generate hydroelectric power. And unfortunately, many of the people there do not even have water, leave alone electricity. How are these communities bound to benefit? You've also mentioned gold in Western Kenya.
Thank you very much, Ben. The issue of benefit sharing of the proceeds emanating from sustainable exploitation of the country's natural wealth is very, very important to us as a commission and to the government of the Republic of Kenya. And as you have mentioned, the Turkana oil in South Lokichar is a big milestone for the Republic in terms of the revenue, but more importantly, the local level dynamics in terms of empowerment. It is true that Kenya has already established itself in the international arena as part of the big players in the oil market. And the discovery of the oil and petroleum in South Lokichar is that fundamental change or transformation that is expected to bolster the economy. What we have noticed is that there's substantial amount of oil, and one of the mechanisms that the government has actually cherished and championed is the public-private arrangement. Because of the lack of resources, because exploitation of resources also require one, capacity in terms of human resource, but importantly the kind of equipment that is also required to ensure that those minerals are or oils are actually exploited to benefit the Republic. So that arrangement where the government, through the national government, incorporates private sector players into the natural resource space is very, very important. And that's how tallow was onboarded through the concessions that was granted by the Ministry of Petroleum. So we know for a fact that basically tallow oil is acting on behalf of the national government and working closely with the national government, which is also the regulator, to ensure that there is sustainable exploitation of that resources, but more importantly is that the revenues are equitably shared between the two levels of government and even to the local community. The challenge, Ben, as I will say it later on, has been the lack of framework for effective benefit sharing of the proceeds emanating from the exploitation of petroleum, not just petroleum, but generally our natural resources. You may be aware that recently there was a bill, Natural Resource Benefit Sharing Bill, but it did not see the light of day because of issues around governance and public participation issues. But it is critical as a country that we have an effective and robust governance framework, that which actually provides an overarching frame for benefit sharing at the three levels, at the national level, at the county level, because we have already embraced devolution as a key principle in the Constitution of Kenya and Article 10, Sub-Article 2. That means that benefits must be shared between, not only between the two levels of government, but equally benefits must be realized and felt by the local communities who have been the custodians and caregivers of these vital resources. So that lack of framework is what has actually hampered the meaningful benefit sharing. But be that as it may, that does not stop the government from ensuring that communities benefit from the conservation, from the protection and sustainable exploitation of resources that truly belongs to them. And the Constitution has already provided the framework under Article 69 that the state is obligated legally and constitutionally to ensure the sustainable exploitation and benefit sharing of those particular proceeds ensuing from the exploitation of the resources. So it is important for the duty bearers, particularly in this case the legislators, to fast track a governance framework in regards to the benefit sharing framework for natural resources, so that it paves way for equity and justice in the mining and mineral sector space. It is true that that is lacking because we have these fragmented pieces of legislation. For example, the Mining Act provides a 70-20-10. 70 national government, 20 county government, and 10 local communities. But how effective is that? And has that been realized by the communities who live with these particular minerals? So when we have a coordinated framework that is properly harmonized and Kenyans participate and provide their views in that governance framework on what they think should actually the national government take, and what they think should the county government take, and what they think they also have rights on as communities who are the custodians of those particular resources become very, very important. And for me, that is one of the biggest drawback as a country, because we at the moment do not have that holistic, coordinated, proper framework as a law to provide that equity and justice for communities to realize meaningful benefits from the resources that they have been living with, or they actually they have custody to.
And for avoidance of doubt, are we still mining oil in Turkana, or that process has stalled for now?
Yeah, that process is ongoing, but it has had some few challenges which are being resolved. And I know the challenges has been more financing in terms of establishing proper finances with our private sector players to ensure that everything rolls smoothly as required. But I know the State Department for Petroleum is on top gear and is working around the clock to ensure that the petroleum within the South Lokicha Basin is explored or exploited for the benefit of the people of Kenya in accordance with the law. Yes.
And since we are still tackling the issue of minerals, are there any mining or environmental impact that we should be looking out for? Because at the end of the day, anywhere that there is a mining process, sometimes you find that the environment is hugely impacted.
Yeah, true. Nothing is good without the bad side. So even as we talk about mining operations, there are a lot of concerns, environmental concerns emanating from unsustainable practices and operations within the mining subsector. We will talk about issues of pollution, for example, and I would give you an example of the Macalda tailings in Migori County, where gold is mined and has been the historic gold mining area for a long time. And in that regard, you'll realize that the artisanal miners purely rely on mercury, to sort of filter and get the gold from the ores. And we know for a fact from an environmental point of view that mercury can be very disastrous or even carcinogenic, so to speak, or cancer-causing. But that is what communities find themselves using, because at the end of the day, local communities must put food on the table. Their children coming back from school at 1 o'clock to take lunch. And the only thing that you see as an avenue for you to put that food and have some income on your pocket is the gold that is around you. The technology and other means of processing gold is a bit expensive and out of reach of majority of local communities. So they rely on mercury, which is really poisonous, not only to the people and the health, but also to the environment, particularly the aquatic water bodies, because it is toxic. That is one major concern. The other concern is the huge pits that are left as a result of, from the mined areas that are not properly decommissioned. And that is also a major area and a security and safety risk, because eventually when those pits are left open without proper decommissioning or rehabilitation, then livestock and even wildlife and even people can always and occasionally get trapped in those particular areas. So they pose a huge security and safety risk. The other concern that we also see from the mining subsector is loss of biodiversity. That because of that digging and actual removal and conversion of that particular area, there are specific plants and even animals that are lost completely, and they may not come back, so to speak. So the loss of plants and animal or biodiversity generally is also a major concern for us in the environment space in regards to unsustainable practices. But we are saying that despite all the challenges, and there are many concerns, it is important for us to look at how do we strike the delicate balance between development and environmental conservation or protection on one hand. And it is important that we strike that, because I will tell you for a fact, Ben, that Kenyans must utilize their resources. It is a God-given resource that they were given to utilize, to enable them, to prosper them, to ensure that they live a decent, dignified life. The issue is what sort of mechanisms and mechanics do we put in place to safeguard both the health and well-being of the people and their environment? Because what goes into the environment eventually comes back to the people and affect them both directly and indirectly. So it is important as a country to have the necessary safeguards to the mining subsector so that we have those safeguards that protect those particular equipment, but more importantly, the hazards and the risks around the mining areas and the processes, and how people can actually be empowered to ensure that they protect themselves from the hazardous materials that are being utilized during the mining operations. So that is one. But importantly, one of the major things that need to be bolstered in that regard is clear policy and governance frameworks. It is about two-pronged approaches. It is about the carrot on one hand and the stick on the other, playing very well at the same time and ensuring that people live a meaningfully dignified life because of their sustainable practices in regards to natural resource exploitation and development.
But Director, I feel that the government is not doing enough, because the Migori gold rush, we've had people dying there in Kakamega because the mines have collapsed, some have suffocated there. And these are natural resources which not only providing employment. They are also boosting the national and the GDP as well. But the intervention by the government are quite slow, if you ask me.
Yeah, it is true. It is true that the government has not been proactive in mitigating the adverse impacts or potential impacts of the risks and concerns posed by the extractive sector, so to speak, using mining as part and parcel of the extractive industry. But I think in as much as the government has to play a vital role, the local communities must also be empowered to take personal and individual responsibility in regards to their actions. So that when we are going to extract minerals, what are the do's and don'ts that I, as an artisanal miner, need to know and understand before I venture into that? And what sort of things are required of me as an individual to start a mining process? So it is two-pronged. It's a basically double-edged sword that should actually cut the government on one side, but also the individual artisanal miner on the other side, so that people have the right information, they have the right knowledge, they also are capacitated to venture into the mining sector, knowing very well that these are the limitations. For example, you are talking about the deaths. And those deaths are occasioned by also the activities of mankind, largely the artisanal miners in this case. And you'll believe the fact that when the artisanal miners are looking for gold, they normally go such a long way deep down underground. They can actually go like almost 10 kilometers below. Sometimes you can even have your own house is having a tunnel without you knowing. They look for gold. But what drives people to do that or to do the mistakes they are doing is poverty. So the government must therefore address the inherent endemic poverty that has actually permeated many households. And in that regard, there must be a lot of empowerment through civic education, but economic empowerment, so that people look at life from different points of view, but more importantly, they are able to balance their livelihoods from different sources without necessarily risking their lives where the risk could be higher than the gains.
I'm looking at also renewable sources of energy, and many countries are turning green. We have, at least for the last couple of years, wind. We also have geothermal for the longest time, and also hydroelectric, and also solar as well. What potential does Kenya have in terms of renewable energy, and what are some of the loopholes actually which are affecting us from going green in everything?
Yeah, renewable energy is very, very important. And again, if you look at the Constitution in regards to natural resources, the definition of natural resources in accordance with Article 260 actually stipulates that renewable energy sources are part and parcel of our natural resources. What I've seen is that there's a paradigm shift in terms of people shifting towards embracing renewable or green energy sources, which include solar, wind, and all that. And currently, and I will tell you this without any iota of doubt in my mind, that a lot of households are currently benefiting from solar energy as one of the green energy sources and shying away from the traditional non-renewable energy sources. So adoption of green energy sources for households and even industrial areas, industrial institutions is a very, very major, big step in terms of, one, enhancing climate change mitigation, but more importantly, looking at the cost effectiveness of green energy sources and even the efficiency in regards to their utilization. As a country, I must admit that we are so much blessed with a lot of green energy or renewable energy sources. We have enormous amount of wind in stable wind speed. If you look at the Turkana area in Marsabit, very, very good area for wind energy production. And we have seen that coming all the way and joining the national grid, all the way from Lake Turkana wind power project.
You even have Ngong.
We also even have across just the Ngong one, also very, very important. But apart from that, also even the fact that the Kenya as a country has a very steady climatic regime. We have solar almost throughout the year. The major part of the country, over 70% of the country receives immense amount of solar radiation, which is quite important for development of renewable energy. I think for me, those potentials are there, and we have detailed the potentials within the Natural Resource Atlas, which we developed and established late last year for the people of Kenya to utilize. The challenge with that is the initial capital investment. You need some substantial initial costs that you need to, sort of pump in to ensure that you reap the benefits. But I see that being navigated by the government through public-private partnership arrangements, where the private sector is able to come and invest some amount of resources, recoup that, but at the same time ensure that there's a proper mechanism for Kenyans to continue benefiting from these resources that indeed belong to them. So truly, there's a lot of potential as a climate change area that renewable resources are becoming very, very important. I've seen even not just the poor households adopting the green and renewable sources of energy, but even households that are socioeconomically advantaged or empowered also still having that. We are likely to see a major paradigm shift in terms of industries and other players, including households, actually shifting towards green and renewable sources. One, because of the reliability. They're quite reliable, they're quite dependable. I've seen that there's a huge demand and a huge positive attitude towards embracing green growth agenda in the Republic of Kenya through renewable sources of energy. A lot of Kenyans currently are having the main national grid or the traditional system of electricity production or electricity, but also they're also having a standby energy sources, which are largely green in nature, especially solar in this case. So it is a good opportunity, Ben, to really relook at it and look at it from a proper spectacle, that we are able to look at it and tap and leverage on these green and renewable sources and provide cooking stoves, provide lighting systems, and of course power our engines, including our vehicles. And you have seen that we have started that. And this is of course being midwifed within the climate change or climate smart agenda or green growth agenda. Yes.
Let's now shift focus to water and wetlands. And from your atlas, I can see an outline of basically almost all, I think it's all the rivers, the reservoirs. What is the status of the wetlands and water resource? I remember when we had a tree planting day, we were also talking about conserving wetlands, and we had a story on TV where some of the wetlands in Western Kenya have been degraded completely. What is the status of the water resources and wetlands as you outlined them?
Thank you very much, Ben. Kenya's water resources are also quite many and diverse. We have our surface water resources, the rivers, the lakes, which we have provided details. In terms of their spatial distribution as a country, we have major lakes, but we also have small lakes. The major lakes, of course, include Lake Turkana, Lake Nakuru, Bogoria, Lake Victoria also. The rivers drainage system is divided into river basins according to the Water Resource Authority, and there are about 7 river basins. We have the Wasonyiro North, Wasonyiro South. We also have Lake Victoria North, Lake Victoria South River Basin, but also we have the Athi and the Tana River Basin. Just to give you a perspective and to excite you, is that the Wasonyiro Basin, both north and south combined, forms the biggest landmass in the Republic of Kenya. But sadly, this geographical position in the drylands make it the smallest contributor in terms of water resource. So it contributes a paltry 13%
And
of
the
the
biggest.
freshwater. And it is the biggest in terms of land mass. But it is largely because of its geographical position in the country, being situated in the drylands. But that does not mean that we can wish it away. There are a lot of resources or water resources within that particular basin that is underground, that has not been properly developed and exploited to benefit the people of Kenya and spur socioeconomic development in that region. Interestingly, from the Wasonyiro, then you come to the other side is the Lake Victoria, both north and south, combined gives you 8% of the landmass of the Republic of Kenya. But that is the one that contributes close to 50% of the fresh water for the Republic of Kenya, followed by Athi at around 23%. So with that data, you are able to see that we have inequitable distribution of our water resources. But what does that mean? What it means is that we must have deliberate attempts to promote equity in water. That if this particular region is endowed, then the governments, both at the national and county level, must work extra hard and invest in proper and sustainable water resource management and development. Particularly, I'm talking about the dryland areas such as Marsabit, Isiolo, Samburu, West Pokot, Turkana. Those areas have enormous amount of water resources underground which are not properly developed. But there are so many opportunities in those areas, including small wetlands. They call them, the communities in those areas call them lagas, and they are vital, small streams that help them because they are able, even during dry season, to just scoop the sand and get the water, because there's always some water lying beneath the sand in those particular areas. So water becomes very important. Coming to your last bit of it on the status of our wetlands, yes, our wetlands are also many. They are very good and productive ecosystems. They contribute a lot in terms of livelihood and food production. Because you'll find, for example, if I want to give you a practical example of Daua River in Mandera, which borders Kenya from the Ethiopian side. Now that river, when you fly over Mandera, you'll find that it constitutes one of the nice and spectacular green infrastructure in that area. You'll have all these brown, dry areas. But all of a sudden, when you are climbing close to the Daua River, you are able to see a lot of life in terms of green infrastructure, occasioned by this particular river, which is also a wetland. It only tells you or paints for you the picture of what wetlands can do, even in a dryland ecosystem, such as Mandera or even Isiolo. But sadly, Ben, our wetlands are rapidly and quickly getting degraded and lost. One, because of our urge and attitude towards development, which is not necessarily in tandem with environmental sustainability. So there's a whole rush to develop humanity or human development at the expense of the environment. And that is also occasioned by the capitalistic mindset of Kenyans, that we want to own things, we want to own land, we want to own a river, we want to own a lake, we have to own and have a title to our riparian lands. It is the capitalistic mindset and attitude that is partly contributing to the loss and degradation of our wetlands and water resources. But importantly, Ben, I would not shy away from telling you that at the same time, in regards to wetlands, we've had considerable amount of concerns in regards to governance. You'll find that wetlands are basically, one, they are lands, and so they are fragile lands, again, partly under the purview of the National Land Commission. But also we have state corporations with duty and responsibility regarding these particular ecosystems, either as water resources, but also as biodiversity hotspots. So you'll have Kenya Wildlife Service, for example, looking at wetlands from that angle of wildlife, but Water Resource Authority are looking at them as water resource infrastructure. The National Environment Management Authority also looking at them as environmental resources or fragile landscapes. So there's a whole myriad of institutions which brings the concern of duplicity of laws and policies around wetlands. I would give you an example that various laws have provided different perspectives in terms of how much distance a farmer or a local person is supposed to observe when it comes to riparian setback line. And that has actually occasioned partly what we see in the country in terms of encroachment into our fragile wetland ecosystems. But we have also noticed that there's just a culture of impunity. You will do what? The uta-do mindset. That is also considerably influencing negatively the wetlands conservation agenda in the Republic of Kenya. And therefore, it is important for Kenyans to understand that these particular ecosystems are meant for them to support their well-being, to support their livelihood, and to enhance a socio-economic and ecological development for posterity. Not just for them, but even for the children to come. And their conservation becomes part and parcel of our own deliberate actions, both at individual level and even at corporate or institutional level.
And let's look at the forest before we embark on telling us exactly what this book contains and why should Kenyans be interested in this book. Looking at the deforestation, we've really messed up. The forest cover, talk about forest, we've encroached in forest to either plant, to plant crops or even cut down trees. The government is on an ambitious program to ensure that we have 15 billion trees to boost both to afforestation and also to improve the environment. I'm looking at the conservation efforts that are there, including the tree planting. How far have they gone in trying to restore our forest?
Yeah, also a very important subsector playing quite a big role in the GDP, but also even at the household level in terms of its contribution to food security, to energy at the household level. So the forest sector is quite important. We know for a fact that in Kenya we have around 3 major categories of forests, just like we have land. So we have those forests that are gazetted public forests, which can either be under, largely under the national government, but we also have community forests under the custodianship of the county governments. But we also have the private forests. So we have all those 3 categories of forests, just like in line with Article 61 of the Constitution, where land in Kenya has also been classified in the same in terms of public, community, and private.
Yeah.
Now, when you look at forests, the current forest cover stands at around 8.8%. That is the valid, credible statistics that we have. And this is current data based on the recent Forest Ecosystem Resource Assessment that was done by the Ministry of Environment, where the Kenya Forest Service is domiciled. That particular exercise was quite techno-driven and provided important and rich data in terms of our forest cover. And therefore, it established that our forest cover currently stands at 8.8%. On the other hand, there's something we call the tree cover. There's a difference between a forest and a tree cover. The tree cover, which is basically what is required in the Constitution under Article 69, that Kenya as a country has committed itself constitutionally to achieve a minimum of 10% tree cover. Our tree cover currently stands at around 12%. That is according to that assessment. But again, we are not yet out of the woods yet, because the Constitution talks about a minimum, meaning we are supposed to go beyond even 30% in terms of our tree cover. That is very important when we look at the current presidential directive in terms of forest and landscape restoration. Indeed, the president rolled a huge, ambitious program to rehabilitate and restore degraded landscapes, forests, wetlands, hilltops, and all that are degraded. And that is basically meant to promote constitutionalism and rule of law in terms of Article 69 of the Constitution, bolstering a minimum of 10% tree cover, among other legislations requiring that. And we have seen a lot of support and goodwill in regards to landscape restoration. There's a lot that is happening, both at individual level and even at the institutional corporate level. There's a lot of support in regards to that. What is of key concern, Ben, and I want you to get this right, is not about planting trees. It is about growing trees.
Not
when you grow,
trees.
not
Yeah,
planting. No.
Excuse me.
Because when you plant and then you abandon. I planted tree. I planted a tree. I planted a seedling in my farm. But then I've not grown it. I've not cared for it. I've not taken note of the requirements and ingredients that that particular tree will require to enable its growth until maturity. So currently we are looking at the discourse about tree growing, not planting trees. So that Kenyans are obligated to take care of the tree. The tree requires water, particularly in the drylands, which receive very minimal rainfall. How do I use the water that I've used to wash my hands when I want to take lunch or breakfast? How can I just use that water that has remained, or what I call wastewater, without necessarily throwing it, but just move out of my house and pour it for a particular plant or plants? And to them, those plants, that becomes very, very important. So you start growing that tree from that point. But importantly, in regards to having it in our education system, the child, how are we socializing our children? Do they know the importance of tree growing? Do they see you, Ben, also taking care of your trees as a person, as the head of the family? Do they see? What is your attitude towards tree growing? Do you have the poor man's attitude of cutting down every vegetation? I see that a lot, and this is actually what I call the divide, particularly in Nairobi. When you look at the Westerners and the Easterners, those who live in the two ecosystem divide of Nairobi, you'll see a very interesting narrative and attitude. When you move forward towards Buruburu, Jogo Road, you'll see a lot of dust because of limited tree and vegetation cover, partly occasioned by the poor attitude and mindset of the local community, that they want to cut everything. While on the other side, they see a grass coming out, they want to nurture it until it sprouts. Because everything requires nurturing, everything requires support, everything requires care. So every living thing requires that, just like you need the same.
Let's switch gears because of the interest of time. Look at climate change has negatively impacted a lot of things, lives, and also our natural resources. What are some of the steps being taken to mitigate its adverse effects on our natural resources? And then tell us about this book. Why did you decide as a commission to come up with the Kenya Natural Resources Atlas? Every natural resource in the country we have, it's right here in this book.
True. Very true, Ben. And you are spot on when you say that the National Land Commission has actually established a very important document for the people of Kenya to utilize, to inform themselves, to educate themselves, and to empower themselves in regards to this particular document. Allow me to refresh your memory in regards to the constitutionalism of this particular document. As you may be aware, the Commission, the National Land Commission in particular, is a constitutional body established under Article 67 of the Constitution. One of the key and critical functions of that commission is to manage and administer public land. And public land is defined in Article 62 of that very Constitution to mean so many natural resources, forests, minerals, water resources, all that is defined to mean that. So the commission picked on that mandate of public land management and settled on one, how do we manage what we do not know? So you first and foremost establish or do a stock take of what resources you are supposed to manage for and on behalf of the people of Kenya. Because our work is a donated work. It is a donated function. We are performing it on behalf of the people of Kenya who have vested those responsibilities to either national government or county government. So we provide that overarching apex oversight responsibility. In this regard to the Atlas, again also the law, Section 15, subsection 3 of the Land Act, empowers the National Land Commission to develop inventories and databases of our natural resources. This was actually a priority in the previous medium-term plan under Kenya Vision 2030, that we must develop our databases through the Atlas. So it's a major flagship project for the Republic of Kenya. What does this Atlas say? The Atlas is basically an information hub. It's like a house where you go in and you are able to get every meal that you want. If you want a forest meal, it is contained in the Atlas. You want a wildlife, it is contained in the Atlas. You want information regarding agro-based resources, it is contained in the Atlas. So the Atlas is basically an information hub where all these vital resources in terms of their information, their statistics, their data that is meant to inform sustainable policy making, sustainable management, sustainable planning, and even general awareness and education of the Republic, that information is contained here. And this is how we have structured it. Apart from the introductory parts of it, we have at number 1, the water and wetland resources coming as the first resources, because life is about that, and other areas require water. So we have actually done a spotlight, shine a spotlight on the water and our wetland resources, looking at the changing patterns and what the government at either level and other stakeholders are expected to do within the water subsector. We have given an account of our water resources using data as late as 2022, and we have demonstrated that graphically and even in terms of visually through the maps. And this particular atlas also at number 2 has talked about the life in water, the fisheries and blue economy as chapter 2, so to speak. And it provides a lot of detail, but more in a snapshot viewpoint, so that we provide this in a visually orienting manner through trends, through graphs, through tables. So we speak less but demonstrate more in terms of those changes and the need for Kenyans to embrace sustainable management practices, either at policy level or even from the action level. The third level of this particular atlas is the biodiversity resources, biodiversity and genetic resources. That is what concerns you as because I've seen you're also keen on forest issues and even wildlife issues. That's where we have also looked at and done a spotlight into the details of what sort of conservancies, how many conservancies do we have? And as a country, we have already profiled that. We have around 206 wildlife conservancies in the Republic, which could not be private or even community. So we have given that. We have also taken note that as a country, currently we have only about 114 wildlife corridors, and they are shrinking and they are getting squeezed, they are getting lost. And the need for the country to make a deliberate move to open up more spaces for wildlife to mitigate against wildlife conflict.
Because of the interest of time, maybe you can run through them and then tell us exactly how did you come up with this, how long did they take, and who are the people involved and who are you targeting?
Okay. Yeah, so apart from the biodiversity resources, the other chapter is the agro-base, which I talked about, which consists of our soils, our livestock, our camels, our goats, our sheep, our snakes, our crocodile, our bees, and why they are important in terms of food production. So we have taken stock of that, and we have taken note of even the challenges that are bedeviling this particular sector of agro-based resources. Finally, at the tail end, we have looked at the issues of mining and extractives, and of course, the final chapter is on the socioeconomic linkages, which also brings into the issue of climate change as a major issue that is affecting the natural resource sector space. This atlas was developed participatorily through a very rigorous multi-stakeholder inclusive process, convened under the leadership of the National Land Commission. Of course, that leadership was provided by the National Land Commission chairperson, Mr. Otachi, alongside the CEO, Madam Kabale Tachiarero. So when we tried to convene, or we started convening the multi-stakeholder agencies, we established an interagency technical team drawn from various governmental and non-governmental sector space. And we have over almost 20 plus institutions participating. But this process was actually supported financially by the UN Food and Agriculture Organization, receiving funds from the European Union. So we are very much alive, and we acknowledge their support. We support the support of our partners, the Ministry of Land, the Ministry of Environment, the National Environment Management Authority, the Water Resource Authority, Kenya Wildlife Service, State Department for Mining, State Department for Petroleum, KALRO, and many other institutions, even in the NGO sector, that provided data that we have currently constituted, or we have actually coalesced.
It's quite comprehensive, 174 pages. How can Kenyans get this book?
The atlas is is one in terms of physical. We have that in our website. Kenyans, I invite Kenyans to visit our website, the National Land Commission website, and you go to the downloads. Then you'll find this beautiful, enriching document that speaks to the core issues in providing data and information regarding Kenya's natural capital, or in terms of numbers, figures, and data. Okay. But on the side, Ben, apart from this static data document, we also have an interactive geoportal, which takes cognizance of the fact that our natural resources can actually undergo certain evolution, that they are likely to change. The data is likely to change. So that geoportal provides updatability that we are able, as a commission and with our partners, able to provide new data and update that in the geoportal. That is also existing within our platform, but also it is also available at the Regional Center for Mapping of Resource Development, which is based in Kasarani, through their portal.
All right, so, and since we are out of time, allow me to give you just a minute to sum it up and tell Kenyans why they should be very interested in knowing where their natural resources are and their status.
Yeah, very true. Kenyans have a right constitutionally under Article 35 of the Constitution to access information held by the state. And our understanding and our drive to have this consolidated information hub is basically aligned to that very article of the Constitution, the right for Kenyans to access information. They need to access that information, one, to inform themselves so that they can invest properly in the natural resource sector space, so that they don't have to go digging around looking for gold or for iron ore or for whatever means. We have provided it here, and we have guided Kenyans in terms of investments within the natural resource sector space and telling them that if you are interested in gold, go to these particular counties. If you're interested in oil, go here. They are guided properly, so that investment decisions are guided by an elaborate, scientifically led process, a document that has taken us close to 4 years. We launched it last year. We started around COVID time, around 2020, 2010. But we managed to launch it, and I invite Kenyans to access it. It is their right to access that information. We have only done our bit as National Land Commission by ensuring that Kenyans are able to consolidate, to access this information in a one-stop document, rather than going to each of the institutions, going to KWS, going to Petroleum. We have provided that.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Ben Opa, who is the Deputy Director, Natural Resources Management, and they figured out how to map out all the resources that we have, natural resources we have in Kenya. And there's something interesting I've seen, figure 177, land tenure regimes in Kenya. If you have questions on land, it's free if you log in to their website. That's where we put a cap. Actually, we haven't even scratched the surface. This is a very interesting book and an interesting discussion. As well as Kenyans, we need to know where our things are and how they can benefit us, and at the end of the day, how we can conserve them. That's wrapped up the first hour, but allow me to just take a quick break. But when we come back, I will be having two doctors who will be talking about mental wellness. Remember, today is World Suicide Prevention Day. More on that after the break.